Hello everyone and welcome to this online lecture of early Chinese texts. I'm sorry that our online session had to end like that the other day due to technical problems, so I'm making this video to complete the lecture. I do want to make this presentation a complete one on its own, so I want to start from the beginning, but I don't want to include the introductory section again. The information there you can easily find in any standard textbook on paleography, and there's no need to belabor to introduce the writing materials and stuff like that. So I want to begin directly from the useful website section, because that seems to be of interest to most people. And again, this lecture is not meant for experts, although I hope experts can also find it interesting and useful. It's always useful to reflect on our experience and look what we have achieved so far. So the goal is not to give a comprehensive introduction to the field, but to demonstrate the method and process of working with ancient manuscripts. So it's a summary of the practical experience of paleographers, and I hope at the end of the lecture you will have a better sense of how paleographers do things, and the process is demystified for you. And I hope you can also get a general sense of how to adjudicate between different philological theories. Often when you engage in these excavated texts, or even just classical Chinese texts, you find yourself in a sea of different opinions, right? And I hope this lecture can give you some sense of how that kind of problem is tackled or resolved. Okay, without further ado, let's look at the topics I want to get through. So I want to talk about methods of decipherment, I want to talk about editing ancient manuscripts, textual variants, and finally reference tools. Although I'm not going to follow the exact order like this, I will touch on all of them, but probably I will jump back and forth. These topics are just related to each other. You can't just follow this procedure, and you have to think about them all together. So before looking at actual examples, let's look at the useful websites. And I will first of all give a short introduction to all of these websites, especially the advantages and disadvantages of all of them. And then I will combine them with actual examples and demonstrate how to use them and what their functions are. So I think the most important thing is, I believe many of these websites you know already. But the important thing is to realize that none of these websites can solve every problem. They're just helpful tools, but they don't really, there can also be mistakes in the materials you'll find on these websites. So I want to focus on that particularly. Now, among them, the first two are for primary texts. And I believe all of you know ctext, and most of you are probably using ctext already. But there is a problem of ctext. So let me show you the website now. Okay. Here is okay, we have oops. Oh, I can't click on it. Okay. So here is ctext. So this is a website you use for the primary texts of the primary text of classical texts. Sometimes it provides you with English translations. And the problem of ctext is that the texts that it has are not critical editions, which means there might be plenty of mistakes in them. So for famous texts like the Analects or the Mengzi or even the Zhuangzi, the texts are of significantly better quality. But for a somewhat obscure text like the He Guanzi, you got to use it with extreme care. And also, if you're writing an academic article, you can't simply just copy something from ctext and paste it into your article and then send it to an academic journal. I think what you need to do is to check it against a critical edition for any kind of errors, and then also do your own punctuation, because some of the primary sources on ctext, the punctuation can be quite messy. So all of these is to say that ctext is very useful. You use it for bare text, but you got to use it with care. Don't take the main text too seriously. Okay, then if ctext is not good for critical editions, then what do you use? here I would recommend a database known as the 中华经典古籍库. So it's a database for the critical editions of classical Chinese texts. You need a subscription to be able to use it. So as you can see, I am logged in as a Tsinghua University user. You need to ask your own institution. You need to look on the library websites of your own institution to see if there's a subscription. So if you have a subscription, then log in, and then you can search the book you want. Let's say, let's take Xunzi as an example. So if I search the Xunzi, then it takes me to two kinds of results: the results of main text and the results of book. So main text results and book results. If I click on book results, it takes me to all of the books, all of the Xunzi related books on this website. All right. So these are books that also have paper editions. For example, this Xunzi Jijie is what we usually use as a standard as the standard text of Xunzi. So if I click on the Jijie, then it takes me to the page of the Jijie. It has the publication information, which means you can just directly cite it. And if you scroll down, there is the content, and you can just click on one of the chapters. All right, let me click on chapter 15. Okay, and then it takes you to the main text of the Xunzi. Note that on this database, the texts are shown with commentaries. Okay, and this is just like the paper edition published by Zhonghua Shuju. The only difference is that it's in horizontal lines, and this is super helpful because if you're reading the PDFs on your computer, and then the Zhonghua Shuju publication, the paper publication, is in vertical lines, right? Although we're all used to reading vertical lines as scholars of classical Chinese texts, but it's really annoying to having scroll up and down all the time. So with this website, you can just read it like this, and you can also quote it. You can also copy and paste it. Although you also need to log in. I'm not logged in here. I'm only logged in as an institutional user. I think there needs to be another kind of login here. But if you're logged in, you can copy it, and you can generate a citation automatically. Although the citation would be in Chinese, so you have to convert it into English. But there are a lot of helpful tools and functions on this website. The most important thing is if you're using C-text, please check it against a critical edition, and check it for variants. And also you can combine it with the commentaries here. But let me say the C-text is still useful because sometimes you just want to look at the bare text, right? You don't want to look at a text with a very long commentary. So in that case, C-text is still useful. Now, one problem now is that there should be page numbers here, but for some reason the page numbers fail to load. I don't know why, but usually when I use it, this page is separated by page numbers in the paperback, so you can just directly cite it without even having to look at your PDF. That's really convenient and useful. The next thing I want to show you is ZDict. So ZDict is just an online Chinese character dictionary, and you can search any dictionary like this here. So for example, if I type in change, then it gives you the variant forms, it gives you the total number of strokes, it gives you the pinyin, it also gives you first of all a basic explanation and then a detailed explanation here, classified into different categories. And then it also gives you the Shuowen definition, including the Sioux script form. And then it gives you all kinds of phonological information, and then etymology and the ancient graphic forms. Although I wouldn't trust this section and also the Shuowen section because there are mistakes in it. There are more specialized websites for looking up Shuowen and phonology and ancient graphic forms, but it's very useful because it has everything on one site. If you're not doing serious research, if you're just looking for stuff, if you're just looking at it, if you're just brainstorming, then it's really useful for you. Another helpful function of this website is this Hanzi Chaifen function. So let's say if you click here, and if you click on the Tiaomu, then you type in a character, it's going to search the character. But if you click here and choose Hanzi Chaifen, then it takes you to a different page. This means you can search a character by its components, and the component doesn't have to be its radical. So any component is fine. Let's say if I just type in you, for example, or you, maybe you, and I click search. So it takes me to all the characters that has you as a component. And in many cases, you is not the radical, right? It's just a component. And this is super helpful because oftentimes you don't know how to type in a character. You don't know the pinyin of it, right? And you don't know the radical. And you don't want to spend too much time counting the number of strokes and then look for the character in a large number of candidates which have the same number of strokes. So this is going to save you a lot of time. And it's also going to help you find many obsolete or ancient characters or variant forms, and you don't know how to find them. You don't know how to input them, but you can find them like this. Okay. The next website I want to show you is called the Indeshi. So here is the Indeshi. It's just Indeshi is just a transliteration of index, but it also means the market of indices. As the name shows, Indeshi gives you the page numbers of a certain character in all kinds of reference tools, but it doesn't have the reference tools themselves, which means you need to have either paper copies or digital copies with you on your either on your computer or in your office. So, but what makes this useful is that if you put in one character in, you can find relevant page numbers in different sources. So let's try it with maybe different Zhou studies. So basically, you can click on here, reference tools or excavated texts. For example, you can search among all of these different sources. And you can also search in, for example, Qiu Xigui's academic collection of Qiu Xigui's academic articles. Let's try the Zhou dictionaries. So I clicked on, so I just selected 工具书 and then 说文解字 and then 字头索引. And here, so I can search in one of the scrolls, one of the chapters. I can also search in one of the radicals. But here I'm just going to search in the whole book. Let's say if I just choose this Ming, if I just type in Ming here and I click search. So it gives me the stroke number and it tells me the page number in all of these different works. If you put your mouth on it, it's going to give you the full name of it. These are the books that we often use for 说文解字. So it only has the page number, and you need the PDFs. And now you may wonder, what if I don't have the PDFs, or what if I just have some of the PDFs? Is there a website like the 国学大师 that has been shut down, which provides the PDFs, all the PDFs online? And there is one that can be used to replace the 国学大师. That is called the 古音小径, or the small mirror of ancient phonology. So I think this is the most useful one I'm going to introduce today. I use it all the time. It's almost like an encyclopedia, an online encyclopedia of ancient Chinese characters or ancient Chinese phonology. So before looking at the main functions, first of all, let me point you to a really useful collection of Shijing materials here. If you choose this 上古音 and then move down and find 诗经韵材料, and if you click on it, it's going to take you to a collection of all of the major commentaries on the Shijing. So first of all, it gives you the names of these poems, of all of the poems, right? And then, so they're arranged according to their sections, either the odes or the 小雅 or the 大雅 or the song. Let's say I want to look at the ancient commentaries on 蒹葭, for example. I just click on 蒹葭. And then it takes you to this page, which gives you all kinds of commentaries or studies, pre-modern and modern studies of the Shijing, all the important ones. For example, the Mao Zhuan and the Zheng Jian and the 经典释文, and it gives you 朱熹诗集传, and it also gives you Qing philology, the works of Qing philologists. It gives you the works of modern scholars and the works of Wen Yiduo, and it also gives you works about variants, Shijing variants, and also about 诗经 rhymes. It even gives you some of the texts, so excavated text of 诗经, but there might be a copyright reason, so it only gives you the page number instead of the actual PDF. It used to have the PDF, but now I think the PDFs are removed. So there's the 马王堆帛书, and there's the 富阳简, and then there's the 上伯简. Okay, if you click on any one of them, let's say if you click on Lin Yiguang's work on the 诗经, it directly takes you to the page, and then you can click next page, and next page, and next page. So this means you have your own personal 诗经 library with you, an online 诗经 library with you. This is pretty much everything you need in one website. Okay, so much for 诗经, but now let's look at its other functions. The most useful part of this website is if you look at this reference tool section. If you put your mouse on it, it's going to show you a menu of all kinds of reference tools. Let's say if I click on, so here is the 训诂, the philological glosses section. There is the 拟音, phonological reconstruction. There is, you can search within the texts of bamboo and silk manuscripts. You can search phonetic series. You can also search phonetic loans, and you can also search the 汉语大词典. So let's take the 训诂as an example. Okay, so first of all, it gives you a list of all the 训诂kind of reference tools in this website. If you let's say search 玄 and click 查询, it's going to take you to 玄 and all of these different philological books. For example, if you're interested in 玄 and the 古文字古灵, then click on this, and it's going to take you to a PDF of that page. Again, you can click next page to read on. And you can even save the image. All right, right click on it and you can save the image. Okay, and okay, so then among all of these 训诂 reference tools, so I will give you a more detailed introduction to some of these. So it seems a lot, but you don't have to look at all of them every time. So I will explain how to use some of them with examples. But now let's look at other categories of reference tools. So again, let's look at this 工具书 and click on maybe 通假字. Okay, and if I click on 通假字, I'm just gonna use this D as an example. If I search D, it takes me to all of these different books on phonetic loans. And if you click on one of it, let's say this, and then it takes you to the relevant page, the page you need. Okay. So, in addition to the 通假字, it also has phonological reconstructions. All right. So if I want to know the phonological reconstruction of, let's say, 中, I click on it, and it shows you the different systems, different reconstruction systems, and you can just copy and paste these into your file. It gives you Old Chinese and Medieval Chinese reconstructions. Okay, so these are phonological reconstructions, phonological glosses, and what else? Yeah, I want to. Oh, sorry, there's still the 简帛. If you click on the 简帛, and if I want to know the occurrences of 中 in these 简帛 texts, then I can search it. And it takes me to the text for examples. It gives you the slip number, the text title, and also the book title. Okay. The next website is for graphic forms. Sorry, let me load these pages. All right, the next one is 小学堂. I usually use 小学堂 for graphic forms. If I want to know, let's say 间, the ancient forms of 间, I put it in the 字形 here, and then I click 确定送出. But it's a little slow. Okay, now it takes you to all of these different forms of 间. So there is the 甲骨文, the oracle bone form, the bronze inscription form, the seal script clerical form. It has the true bamboo slip form, and also the Qing bamboo slip form. And then the 传抄古文字. The 传抄古文字, I'm going to explain what this is in a moment. So let's just click on the 楚系简帛文字. Let me also click on the 甲骨文 and the 金文. And waiting for it to load. Okay, so here is the form of Jian in true bamboo slips. It gives you the characters and the beautiful images of characters, and it also gives you where it is from. So you need to know what these are short for, and also the slip number and the character form. It also gives you the indices here, the relevant page numbers in paperback books. If you click on one single character, and then you can click and save the image, or you can generate a bigger photo and then click and save the image. All right, and if we click on the oracle bone forms, these are the oracle bone forms and the forms in bronze inscriptions. Okay, so I find this to be a really useful website for ancient graphic forms. It's much better than the one you see on Zdict. And here it gives you a list of all of the books it makes use of. Oh, sorry, this is still the indices of Jian, but if you go back to the main page, it's going to give you the references. Oh, 收录现况. If you click on the 收录现况, it gives you all of the books included in this website. Okay, so the last one I want to show you is specifically used for the 说文解字. This is called the 说文解字综合检索系统. So why do we want to use this website if we already have the 说文 definition? So as I told you on the Handian, you already have the 说文 definition. Right? If I click on Zhou, for example, I click this search, and it is going to take me to there's no. Let me use another one. So it's going to take you to a 说文 definition. But this one, you can use the 图像查阅, which means you can search, you can look at the different woodblock editions of 说文 instead of just the text. So this is for text search. This is for the search of images of woodblock editions. If I click on this text search, and also let me click on both ones. Oh, all right, here. So if I search, for example, let's just use Shou as an example. If I search Shou, and then it gives you just the text arranged in this in table. But if you search Shou here, it's going to give you all of these pages in woodblock editions, including the commentaries and the Guling. So, for example, you can look at the 说文 in the Songben, and it gives you the image, the PDF, the scanned image of this Song edition, Song woodblock edition of 说文. And if you click on the 细传, it gives you another woodblock edition. Now, you might wonder, why do we want to look at woodblock editions? Because sometimes it's not enough to just look at text. There are going to be some differences among these woodblock editions. A classic example is the character xia. So this means a chariot pin, chariot linchpin. If I click on the Songben, for example, and if I click on a different woodblock edition, you would find that. So here, okay. So the character is, where is it? Yeah. So the seal form, the seal script form of the character is here. And if you look at a different edition, the seal script form character is actually a little bit different. If you look at the middle section, this one and this one, they're a little bit different. And this became the basis of a classic article by Qiu Xigui, and he uses that difference to solve a problem in oracle manuscriptions. So if you're working at a really advanced level, then looking at these woodblock editions is really important. So if you're not working closely with paleographic materials, then perhaps it's not that important for you. But I still would encourage you to read the woodblock editions instead of just the bare text. Okay. Now let's go back to the slide. I believe we have looked at all of these useful websites. There are a few others I want to show you, but I don't want to explain them in detail. So here, I believe TLS is a website familiar to many of you. And these are not directly related to paleography, so I just want to explain them very briefly. The second one is a useful map, and you can, it's Google Map, and you can add layers of ancient place names on the Google Map. It's only for early China, not for later period, but but on this map, you can compare the ancient place names with modern place names. And the next one is a useful website for comparing the different commentaries on the Chunqiu Classic, especially the three, the Zhou commentary, the Guliang, and the Gongyang commentaries. Because the Chunqiu is such an important work for early Chinese culture, then you might find this website really useful. And the last one, Shuge, is a website for you to download beautifully scanned images of woodblock editions. You can also check it out on your own. And also, if you're interested in digital sinology, I would refer you to these two websites. You will find a lot of useful information on them. I'm not an expert on digital sinology, so I don't want to, I can't give you too much information, but you would find these two websites really useful. Now that we have looked at all these websites, let me show you a classification of reference tools. When we were looking at the Small Mirror of Ancient Phonology website, you see a ton of dictionaries on it, right? A ton of reference tools. So you get lost when you're a beginner in the field. You get lost. You don't know how to use them. You don't know what they're for. Here is a map of their functions. I don't think this is a systematic classification, but it's a classification for you to begin with. All right. So let's start from a character here, and each character has three different aspects. It has a graphic form, it has a sound, and it also has a meaning. And that applies to any single character. So each one of these aspects can be the basis for a kind of variant. So we have graphic confusion, we have phonetic loan, we also have synonyms. And so the reference tools can be classified according to these different aspects. So for graphic forms, we have dictionaries for transmitted ancient characters. We have compilations of ancient graphic forms. We have graphic morphology. This is actually a subfield of study, but you can also use it as a reference tool. We have handwriting analysis. We have variant characters. We also have graphic errors. And as for sound, we have phonetic loans and phonetic series. As for meaning, we have semantic dictionaries. We have all kinds of Shuwen studies. I singled it out as a category on its own because Shuwen is such an important source, and there are a long history of Shuwen studies. Many of the commentaries and later works are super helpful, so it's a type on its own. And then we also have these compilations of philological glosses. We have dictionaries of synonyms, and we also have dictionaries of function words. I'm not going to explain all of them today. I only want to show you a number of them, how to use a number of them. So sometimes we have reference tools that combine several of these, two or more of these aspects. For example, the study of word families is about both sound and meaning. Or finally, this is something I want to get to toward the end, the study of orthography. Or in Chinese, there are several ways of referring to this kind of study. They're either the 音形义关系, the sound, form, and meaning relationship, or the word-character relationship, or the habit of using characters. I'm not sure if orthography is the right word to use in English, but I'll explain what I mean here by giving you actual examples. So this is only meant to give you a preliminary sense of the things out there. Now let me try to explain what they're used for with some actual examples. Okay, so when we're working with a bamboo text, when we're editing an ancient bamboo manuscript, usually we have to follow these 4 steps. First of all, because these bamboo manuscripts, they were originally bamboo bundles, and when they were buried in tombs, and then when they were rediscovered, the straps that tie them together are usually lost. So they're a mess. They're all mixed up together. The first thing you need to do is you need to sort them out into several slip groups. So this is done based on their physical and codicological features. At this stage, we're not looking at the textual content yet. We're just looking at the material properties. And then once you sort them out into several groups, and you can try to figure out the order of slips within a single group. Now, a group doesn't have to be one single text or one single manuscript. Sometimes, several manuscripts can share the same physical properties. And sometimes one manuscript or one bamboo bundle can have several texts on it. So, but we still have to determine the relative order of slips within the single group. And I'm not going to spend any time on this. If you're interested, I think the best book up to now is Jia Lianxiang's 战国主述形式及相关问题研究. I would encourage you to read this book. It's a very good study of physical and codicological features. Okay, so after we know the slip order of a single manuscript, now we start to work on decipherment of the characters and the reading of the textual content. So, and then we have to do 2 things. First of all, with a single slip, we provide a direct transcription that is meant to capture the graphic form strictly of the original. So, if you look at this bamboo slip on your left, then this DT is direct transcription. Then each character in modern orthographic form is meant to capture the graphic form of the ancient characters exactly in a strict fashion. That is why, for example, we have this for this, even if you don't know what this is and what this means. But it's not meant to capture its meaning, but it's only meant to capture its graphic form. We call that direct transcription. After that, we produce another line called interpretive transcription. And in this transcription is meant to reflect its meaning. So if you look at the who here, that means we take this who to be this who. We read this who, the who on the left, to be the who on the right. And if you look at the interpretive transcription, then you know what it means, right? If you only look at the direct transcription, it's graphic. It's not meaningful. It's not meant to be semantic. Okay, so the process of moving from direct transcription to interpretive transcription is very complicated. And basically, what we're doing is we're trying to figure out the meaning based on its graphic form and context. The only information we have, the only kinds of information we have are just the graphic form of each individual characters and a string of characters, which is context. And we're trying to get from this information to what it means. That is the purpose of working with manuscripts. Now, let me break down this process for you and show you how to use the reference tools at each stage. The different tools are meant to be used for different stages. So let's break down this process. Now, the first thing to know is, how do we get direct transcriptions from the ancient graphic forms, right? How do we know that this should be transcribed as this in a modern orthographic form? If we don't transcribe it, it's inaccessible to modern readers. If we transcribe it into this form, then it's easier for us to work with it. So the first thing is to explain this. Okay, now I want to start with something you're all familiar with. So let's take this slip as an example. This is the first slip of manuscript A, of Guodian manuscript A of the Laozi. we know that the Guodian Laozi has 3 manuscripts. So this is the first slip of manuscript A, the beginning of the first slip of manuscript A. Okay, now let's look at the first 4 characters as an example and how to decipher them. I want to do it really slowly and combine it with the use of reference tools. Okay, so first of all, we produce direct transcriptions. In this case, it looks like this. It should look like this. All right. Now, the question is, how do we know that the first one is should be transcribed into this form, and the third one should be transcribed into this form? For the zhi, I think it's easier for you to see, right? And for a few others, ming probably also easier for you to see because it's a little similar, and this li is also kind of similar. But for a few others, and let's think about them. If you look it up, if you look them up, if you're familiar with the Zhou Jiezi, then you actually see that these ancient character forms are recorded in the Zhou. So in this case, we have this form. And actually, the first character on the bamboo slip is a simplified form of this. And the Zhou tells you that it's the Guwen Jue, it's the ancient character of Jue. So we transcribe it as this character, and then we know it's a Jue. For the third one, its form is also recorded in the Shuowen, and we know that it's qi, to abandon, 抛弃的 qi. So, Shuowen gives 2 ancient forms of one is the Zhouwen form, the other is the Guwen form, and you can find that the Guwen form corresponds exactly to this one on the bamboo slip. It actually does look like the modern simplified form a little bit. So, okay, now we call these characters in the Shuowen transmitted ancient characters because they are ancient graphic forms recorded in the transmitted texts. And usually these transmitted ancient characters are related to their modern equivalent or clerical equivalents. So by collecting all of the transmitted ancient characters in the transmitted sources, we're able to establish a preliminary link between the ancient form and the modern orthographic form. And this is why it's important to know and to study the transmitted ancient characters. So here are some of the important books and studies of transmitted ancient characters. The second one is particularly important because it's a compilation. It's a 古文字编, so it's a compilation of all of the transmitted ancient characters you can find in received texts. On the right-hand side, I'm giving you a page from the 传抄古文字编. So it's the transmitted ancient graphic forms of Liang in different kinds of books. So the first 3 are in the Shuowen, and then we also have some forms in the Hanjian, for example. So these are the abbreviations of book titles. And basically, you can see that Liang has all of these different ancient character forms. But when you're using something like this, you got to be careful because not all of these ancient forms are correct. So they're a good starting point, but sometimes there are a lot of mistakes in these transmitted ancient characters. But they can be very helpful. Now, let's look at this one bamboo slip from the Xingyang corpus. So it's Xingyang corpus number 24. And several characters on it are exactly the ancient form of Liang. And we know it's Liang because the ancient graphic form, the ancient graphic forms are recorded in these transmitted sources. So if you compare these graphic forms to this, and also this form in the Shuowen, you would see that they're quite similar, right? Because they both have this on top and a middle, and then the bottom. The books by Zhang Fuhai and Li Chuntao, although they're not strictly speaking reference tools, but they're really good studies. So if you're interested in this topic, if you want to know more about the study of transmitted ancient characters, I would strongly recommend these books, especially Li Chuntao's book. It's new and it's systematic, developed from his dissertation. If you don't have a copy of the book, it's also possible to get a copy of the dissertation from Zhiwang, from CNKI. Okay. Now let's look at a more interesting example with regard to the transmitted ancient characters. So in this case, I want to show you the variant forms of fa. In the Shuowen, if you look at the Shuowen definition, the Shouwen gives you two variant forms. All right, the head character is actually this fa instead of the second one. We're all most familiar with the second one, but the Shouwen, the head of the entry is the first fa, and then it gives you the second fa as the Jingwen Sheng, so it's a simplified form, an abbreviated form of the first fa, and then it gives you a Guwen, which is like this. So, and we actually see this fa used in some of the excavated texts. For example, the Zhou, the Nine Lords manuscript from the Ma Wangdou, we saw it in our online discussion. We used the Zhou to correct some mistakes in the transmitted texts. But here is another example of how it makes use of the ancient form of fa. So it talks about so there are several occurrences of this character. For example, it says 为天不失 and this, and then 天 something 无 and then a missing character 复生万物, and then finally 大矣在不失 this, and 法则名分何也. Okay, so now if you look at the character itself, it looks very much like a 起, right? 企业的企. But if you transcribe it into 起, it doesn't really make any sense. What does it mean to say that the 天不失起? So most people agree that this is actually a ancient graphic form of fa, which is recorded in the Shouwen. But there is one interesting problem, because if you look at the third textual occurrence, then right after the 不失范, right after this 不失法, there is another fa, which is the second form of recorded in the Shouwen, the form we're most familiar with. And if you look at the manuscript, it's here. It's right after this fa. It's here. So if they're distinguished, then probably this is not the ancient graphic form of fa, but something else. There are some discussions of this problem, but most people agree that this is fa, but probably something slightly different. That is to say, when Shouwen records something as the ancient graphic form, it doesn't exactly have to be its equivalent. So the nature of these transmitted ancient graphic forms still needs to be studied, right? That's why we have. That is why I recommend the books by Zhang Fuhai and Li Chuntao, because we have to arrive at an understanding of what the Shouwen means by giving the ancient graphic forms of this fa. Does it mean that this is simply an ancient equivalent of fa, or does it mean that it's a phonetic loan, or is it still something else? We're not exactly sure. So it's a topic that we need to study. Okay, and another interesting example is from the Qingzhong Wu chapter of the Guanzi. So if you look at the Qingzhong Wu chapter of the Guanzi, there are two texts that gives you these strange characters. First of all, it says this is 必喜, this is 伏羲. Okay, 伏羲坐造六 something, 以迎阴阳. And then the next one says 周人之望循六 this, 合阴阳而天下化之. So this is now we know that these are graphic confusion, graphic errors of this, and it actually means 伏羲做造六法以迎阴阳, and here it is 周人之望循六法合阴阳. So if we don't know this transmitted ancient character, then we don't know that this could be a graphic error for fa, right? This is why these transmitted ancient characters are extremely important, and it also helps us solve problems like this. Otherwise, we would probably transcribe it as qi. Another interesting thing about this ancient form of fa is that it can be easily confused with a few other characters in For example, if you look at this line, it can be easily confused with qi or ding or quan. So let's look at these other examples. Okay, so let's look at an example of the confusion of fa and ding. Okay, so first of all, in the 大诰 chapter of the 上书, there is this sentence, 尔时王敢易法, so do not dare to change the law. And this sentence appears in not an exact form, but this appears in the 汉书 as 尔不得易定. So this 易法 becomes 易定. Now this sentence in the 汉书 appears in the 斋方进传, and in the 斋方进传, there is Wang Mang's announcement, and we know that Wang Mang is loves ancient stuff, right? He also makes things that imitates ancient stuff. So in this 斋方进传, there's a text we usually call the 莽告, Wang Mang's announcement, which is meant to imitate the style of the 大诰. So it's trying to imitate the style of the 大诰, and this sentence 而不得议定 is an imitation of 尔时王感义法, but then this 法 becomes 定 here. So okay. Now, if you look at the text of the Hanshu, there is actually a problem, because if you search this sentence in C text, then you can't find it. Why? Because let's look at this first block quotation this is the text from the C text, and it just says 明之表仪，敌之上帝命，况今天降定于汉国. There's no this sentence, but if you look at it in a critical edition of the Hanshu, in the 中华经典古籍库, then it gives you this sentence in brackets. All right, so here is 明之表仪，敌之上帝命，越天府城而不得议定, and then 况今天降定于汉国. So this is one of the reasons why I said C text is not totally reliable, because it doesn't really give you this sentence. Now, why is this sentence put in brackets? Because it's not in the Woodblock edition used by it's not in one Woodblock edition, but in many other Woodblock editions. So let's look at the vertical text on the right. So these are quoted from the 汉书补注 by Wang Qianqian. And we have the sentence here in marked out by red lines. And let's look at philological note number 13. Okay, number 13, the 补注 part of note number 13 quotes 钱大钊, and he says, 此下托正文，越天府城而不得议定九字。又托注文，诗古曰 blah 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 blah. These are 颜师古's commentary on these 9 characters. Okay, so when you look at 颜师古's commentary, he says, 不得改易天之定命. That is to say, he interprets this 定 as 定命, so as settled, right, as a meaningful word on its own. And then Qian Dazhao says, okay, so these 9 characters are in these Woodblock editions, but then the Jigu edition doesn't have it. Okay, and then so Qian Dazhao makes the interesting observation. He says, I think this ding should be actually the ancient form of fa, and this ancient form is recorded in the Shuowen. He gives you the Shuowen ancient graphic form, and he says that this is a graphic confusion, because in the 大诰 we have this 尔时王感义法, and that is evidence for it. Although Wang Xianqian later disagrees with Qian Dazhao, but I think Qian Dazhao is really, really persuasive here. He compares this ding with fa, and he finds that, this ding looks so similar to the ancient graphic form of fa. So probably whoever was, writing this mangao used a manuscript that has this fa instead of the ancient form of fa, instead of the form we're familiar with, and then it's later confused with ding. So then you have ding here. But Yan Shigu doesn't understand this. The commentator doesn't understand this. So Yan Shigu takes this to be, ding ming, the settled command, the fixed command. And all of these you cannot find by searching in C text. And now let's look at a more complicated example. So, so here we have 3 different editions of the Ziyi. The Ziyi and the Li included in the Li Ji is most familiar to all of you, I guess. So we have a Ziyi in the Li Ji, we have another Ziyi in the Guodian, and we have another Ziyi manuscript in the Shanghai Museum corpus. So now it's possible for us to compare all of the 3 different versions. So I'm giving you the texts in the corresponding texts in this table, and so first of all, we have in the received Ziyi, we have this text, which corresponds to slip 9 of Guodian and slip 5 in the Shanghai Museum manuscript. And then the next text, which has a fa, corresponds to slip 27 in the Guodian and slip 14 in the Shanghai Museum manuscript. And also, I'm showing you the images of these bamboo slips. So this is slip 5 of Shanghai Museum manuscript. This is slip 9 of Guodian manuscript. This is slip 27 of Guodian manuscript. And then finally, we have slip 14 in the Shanghai Museum manuscript. Okay, so now let's look at these texts. First of all, In the received 字义, it is 兴以体全，义以体伤，君以名存，义以名亡. But in the 国电字义, we have this 故, this should be 故. Therefore, 故兴以体废. The heart is destroyed or abandoned, or where the heart fails because of the body. And then the ruler is destroyed because of its people. This 芒 should be 王. And then in the Shanghai Museum version, it's 故兴以体 and this, the strange character. And then 君以王, it doesn't have the 名. A 名 is probably missing here. Okay, so when we compare all of them, right? When we compare all of them, you find that this seems to be 法, but usually in ancient texts, 法 is often used as a phonetic loan for 废. In this case, we are pretty sure that it's a phonetic loan. So here, if you take it to be 故兴以体废, if the heart is destroyed because of the body, then it works really well with ruler is destroyed because of the people, right? And then this is simply one part of the 法. It's the top right corner of 法, right? So this seems to be a simplified version of 法. We can take the manuscripts to be agreeing with each other, but how do we account for this 全 here? And it's most probably a graphic mistake of the ancient form of 法. So there might be another manuscript which has this form, and then a certain scribe didn't understand it and transcribed it as and copied it as this 全. It does make some sense, right? 兴以体全，义以体义以体伤，君以名存，义以名亡. So it does make some sense. So coincidentally, the 全 meaning also works in this case. It's only that you have to add two sentences to make them strict parallels. So in the 国电 example, both means to be abandoned or to perish, right? The ruler perishes because of his people, and the heart perishes or the heart is destroyed because of the body. So they mean the same thing. But in the meaning in the 国电 text is more complicated. So there's a contrast between preservation and hurt. Okay, and this is probably because this 全 is miscopied as this 法 is miscopied as 全, and then to make better sense of the text, a few more lines are added, just to make the text look better. Okay, and then now let's look at the other example, the other text. So in the received 字义, it is said that 为作侮虐之行曰法, and this 法 is just written as it's formal, it's more complicated form in the 国电字义, and also in this form in the Shanghai Museum 字义. So by this we know that in Warring States bamboo manuscripts, we do have this form. So it's really possible that the 法 here is written in a different manuscript as this 法. And if you want to look at their forms, here they are. So in both cases, 国电 uses the same 法, although they mean different things. Here it means 废, right? It's the character is used for the word 废, or to be destroyed. But here the character is used for to stand for itself. Okay, so I think there's a lesson to be learned from this rather complicated case. The lesson is, if we're doing a textual search, a search in a textual database, we have to be very careful about what we're actually doing. We have to understand the process of the actual results. So we can only put in a graphic form, but a graphic form doesn't necessarily take us to the word itself, or it doesn't necessarily take to a specific meaning. So let's say if you're an intellectual historian, or if you're a philosopher, if you want to know all the occurrences of 法 in a specific text, and then you put in 法 in C text and find all the occurrences, and then you can probably even do a statistical analysis of 法 and its distribution, and you can do your text mining in digital sinology. But there is a potential problem there, because you can only search one graphic form, but you're missing a lot of things, right? On the one hand, this 法 could be used for a different word, just like this 法 can be used for 废. So it doesn't always mean 法, even if it's the character 法. And on the other hand, other characters are used for the word 法, or for the concept law. So merely by searching this 法 is not important. Sometimes you might have a 全 or this, or sometimes you might even have something like, sorry, you might even have a ding, which should be fa, or sometimes you might even have this kind of weird thing, and it is not it's not included in any early dictionary. It's not really a character. It's just a graphic mistake. It's just the result of some scribe who didn't really understand the ancient character form of fa. Okay, so this just shows us that if you want to do a statistical analysis of classical Chinese text or a certain character, then or a certain word, then you really have to be careful about these database searches. The reason is that we're working with texts that were produced in an age without a consistent orthography. So there are a lot of it's not a one-to-one correspondence, right? And also, it's not mechanically reproduced. Each time when a character is copied, there might be some subtle changes introduced in the process. So statistical analysis or text analysis, in this case, cannot be divorced from philology, really. We need to understand these potential problems in the character-word relationship. And this is one more reason why we should all use C-text with care. Okay, so much for transmitted ancient character forms. Now let's consider the interpretive transcription. Let's go back to our Laozi example. We have looked at the ancient character forms of Jue and Qi, but now let's look at this one, the fourth one. So the fourth one is also recorded in the Shuowen. It's here. So this, the Shuowen says, is the ancient character form of bian, the bian here, which means the whip. So you can directly transcribe it as this, and then we know that it's bian. All right, now, once we're done with this direct transcription, once we're done with this, the transcription that is meant to capture the graphic form, the problem is this still doesn't make good sense in context. Now, 觉 and 气, they make really good sense, right? 觉智气, then something. And the transmitted, we know that in the transmitted text, this part is 决胜气智, to abandon sages and to give up wisdom. So it's quite different from, although the first and the third characters are the same, but the whole text is this part is quite different from the transmitted source. So there's no help. It's no help there. We still have to figure out. We're on our own to try to figure out what this bian is. Now we know that it's bian, but to abandon whips doesn't really make good sense. All right, bian means either whip or as a verb to whip, and the Shuowen defines it as 驱野. When you're whipping the horse, you're actually driving the horse, right? So it's to drive. It's also, metaphorically speaking, it's to drive. Okay, so if Juan doesn't work here, then we have to consider other possibilities. And here and then, I'm giving you a list of possible directions where you can think, directions in which you can think. So the first one is this bian could be a graphic error. So it's actually something else here. Or this bian might not be used in its usual sense, or it might be a phonetic loan. And in most cases, it should be the phonetic loan. According to our experience, the phonetic loan is the most common thing, but occasionally it's also a graphic error or the rare meaning of bian. Now, this is the part that we have to use other kinds of reference tools. Now, we have introduced the reference tools with regard to transmitted ancient characters, but now let's look at other ones. Before looking at those, before looking at the reference tools of graphic era, of rare meaning, and of phonetic loans, let me give you the answer here, all right? Most people now believe that bian is a phonetic loan for this bian or this bian. It means dispute or discrimination. Usually, we would say that we read this first bian as the second bian here. The relationship between them is a phonetic borrowing, and this is also a concept I will explain later. So here, the reasoning process is actually with the first form. By looking it up in the Shuowen, we know this, and then we get from this to bian, and finally we get from this bian to bian. So 觉智气bian, that works really well. And then we can produce a line of interpretive transcription of 觉智气bian here. Oh, another question you might have is, okay, now I have this form, but how do I look this form up? Because in the Shuowen, the head of the character is this bian, right? And you can only search the head of an entry. You can't really search this. And also, if you don't know what the corresponding form is, what the clerical form is, how do you search it, right? And the answer is you actually can't. The only way to do this is just to familiarize yourself with all the ancient character forms. And you can do this by grabbing a 文字编 or a compilation of ancient graphic forms, or just to look through a 传抄古文字编. It might seem a really daunting task, but actually it's not really that impossible, because we know that Chinese characters only have a very limited number of components, right? Once you're familiar with these components, you pretty much know these character forms. And because no matter how complicated a character is, it's usually composed of these basic components. Okay. Okay, so that means most of the time, the first line of transcription, the direct transcription is not very problematic. Although next week I'm going to show you a case in which direct transcription becomes a big problem. Occasionally we do have that, but most of the time it's quite straightforward. The transcription here is quite straightforward. It's the interpretive transcription that gets really controversial. So because we have all these different possibilities, it can be a graphic error, it can be an unusual meaning, or it can be a phonetic loan. And when it comes to be a phonetic loan, there are tons of problems there. So let's look at some of them. All right, first of all, the books you can look at for graphic confusion. Again, I'm not giving you a comprehensive list of studies of graphic confusion. I'm just giving you good places to start with. The first book is a standard text of graphic morphology of ancient Chinese characters. 古文字构形学. It's a really good book. It doesn't deal with graphic confusion per se, but there are useful chapters in it that deal with graphic confusion. And the second book is more recent, and it deals with graphic confusion in TrueScript specifically. So here I'm giving you some typical examples of graphic confusion. For example, Wang and Zuo, they can very easily be confused. And also Xiang and Tu are a very common confusion, a common case of confusion. And finally, Yi and Jing are also often confused. Okay. And the next one is reference tools for meaning. So let's say, so let's go back a little bit. So let's say this bian might not be used in its usual sense. Then how do we look for the meanings of bian? Now there are some useful reference tools. Of course, the first place you go to is the 汉语大字典 and the 说文解字. The 汉语大字典, I don't have to explain it. You all know the 汉语大字典, but merely looking at the 汉语大字典 is not important because we have to use another really useful book called the 固训会传. I'm going to show you. So, all right, let's look at the 固训会传 in the on this website. Let's click the 工具书 and then click 训诂 and let's say 编. Okay. So it takes you to all these different sources, and the 固训会传 is here. Let's click on the 编 in the 固训会传. Okay, so the 固训会传, as the name shows, it's a compilation of ancient philological glosses. And it's arranged according to meaning types. So it not only gives you the glosses, but it also gives you where it comes from and the context. So for example, here, 编以革扑罪人者也, and it tells you that it's from 玄应英译卷8编敕注. So it gives you the source and the context. this is supposed to be a comprehensive list of all the pre-modern, not just ancient, but pre-modern, including Qing Dynasty philological glosses. So all the pre-modern philological glosses on this character. Now, why is this more important than the Hanyu Dazhidian? Now, compared to the Hanyu Dazhidian, the Hanyu Dazhidian are more organized, right? Because let's say in this case, you have so many entries that actually that are actually the same, right? These are qu and qu chi and o, and also ji. So these are pretty much the same. They're just different ways of explaining the same thing. And these are all synonyms. But the Guxun Huizuan doesn't really collapse them into one single meaning category. It gives you all the ancient philological glosses, whereas the Hanyu Dazidian gives you an organized version, an analyzed version. Right? But this is still important because we're dealing with the primary sources here. This is actually what the Hanyu Dazidian comes from. The Hanyu Dazidian is made on the basis of these ancient philological glosses. Okay, so this is supposed to be the most comprehensive one. But one thing you need to be careful about is that not all of these meanings should be taken for granted because these are the understandings of ancient commentators. They believe that this BN has this meaning, but they could be wrong. They could make a mistake. In this case, it's probably not so indicative, but let's try to look at another case. So let me search Liu here. Okay, we know that Liu means to stop, right, or to stay. So most commentators gloss it as 止 or 迟 or 智. These are pretty much the same. But then there is a strange one. If you look at number 18, then Wei Zhao in Wei Zhao's commentary on the Guoyu, in the sentence 举国留之, Wei Zhao says this liu is 治之也. He says to liu is to govern or to bring order to. Now this is a rare meaning, right? We don't usually think of liu as having that meaning. But when you're using it, when you're trying to quote it, you have to be careful because this is only Wei Zhao's understanding. Wei Zhao could be wrong about this case. You have to read this again in the original context, and probably also look for other ancient commentators to see if there's another commentary on this, and also try to figure it out yourself whether this is a mistake. Sometimes people don't do that. Sometimes they just cite this entry and say, Wei Zhao says that it means 智, and okay, let's trust him. And it also does have that meaning, but not necessarily so, because we know that ancient commentators often make mistakes. So this is why the Guxun Huizhuan is extremely useful. It's comprehensive, but it's still got to be used with care. I think any reference tool needs to be used with care in principle. When it comes to a specific case, you have to make your own judgment. Another thing to pay attention to for the Guxun Huizhuan is that it doesn't just give you philological glosses of meaning. It actually gives you a lot of phonetic loans, or 假借. So, and it doesn't really distinguish between these different cases, right? Here you see it 假借为流, or this 流 and 流 gu 通用. So he's giving you 通假 and 假借 cases, phonetic loans. So in fact, many of the reference tools I'm going to introduce today are like this. They're actually collections of, they don't really make a conceptual distinction between different kinds of variants. So sometimes in a dictionary of phonetic loans, you would see synonyms. Sometimes not just synonyms, but ancient graphic forms and modern graphic forms. So this is also something you need to be careful about. Not all of them are about meaning. Sometimes they're graphic loans. Sometimes they're ancient and modern forms. Sometimes they're not graphic, but phonetic loans. But sometimes they're synonyms. So you have to be careful about the nature of these variants here. Still, the Guxun Huizhuan is extremely helpful. Because it does the work for you, right? It collects all of these ancient philological glosses. Okay, so that's the Guxun Huizhuan. Another thing I want to talk about specifically is a book about the Shouwen Jiezi, because Shouwen is such an important source. So we need to and there's a ton of scholarship on the Shuowen. We always need to read the Shuowen together with, for example, Duan Yucai's commentary and a few other works. And a book that I would recommend specifically is this Shuowen Xingzheng by Ji Xusheng. It's really good for beginners, and it gives you. So here I'm showing you a page from the Shuowen Xingzheng. So it's the entry on Shen. And so in the 说文 Xingzheng page, it gives you the Shen, and it also gives you all the ancient, the typical ancient graphic forms, not all of the forms, but for each stage, for example, oracle inscriptions, bronze inscriptions, or Warring States manuscripts, for each stage, it gives you one or a few typical forms. And then, so first of all, it gives you the 说文 definition, right? It gives you the 说文 definition. It gives you the some indices in these, for example, Warring States character dictionaries or Orgabone or bronze inscription dictionaries. And then it gives you the 说文 definition, then it gives you the typical ancient graphic forms, and finally it gives you the author's own explanation of its meaning and its graphic form. And usually it's in this part that the author criticizes 说文. So for example, here, Ji Xusheng says 说文因此视为干批偶也，不可信. He thinks that this is not credible. The 说文 definition is not credible. So the reason why this book is so useful is because we all know that the 说文 contains plenty of mistakes, and a lot of its definitions and interpretations, or even graphic forms, were disproved already by excavated textual discoveries, or by the 100 years of studying Orgabon inscriptions or bronze inscriptions. So the 说文 Xingzheng gives you an up-to-date commentary on the 说文by incorporating paleographic research of the past 100 years. Of course, now it's already a little bit out of date because the latest version, I would encourage you to use the latest version. Right? There's the earlier one is published, I don't remember when, maybe 2003, but the latest revised edition is published in 2010. Maybe there will be another revised edition later, but the latest one we have now is from 2010. So it's already 11 years from now, and a lot of things happened in the meantime. So probably some of the stuff are out of date already, but it's still really helpful, and it tells you where. So it tells you where 说文 can be corrected, or at least it tells you where 说文 can be doubted. So I would certainly encourage you to read the 说文 Xingzheng with Gu Xunhui. But unfortunately, the 说文 Xingzheng is not on any of the websites I mentioned to you before. So you need a PDF. You need to get a PDF or a hard copy. Okay, next let's look at reference tools for sound. But before doing that, we have to do a bit of explanation. We have to explain what does it mean to say that something is a phonetic loan for something else. This is what we call the rebus principle in linguistics. And it's actually seen not just in Chinese, but in many other world languages, in many other world writing systems. Okay, so the rebus principle is very simple. So suppose we have a rebus. What is a bee plus a leaf? And the answer is belief. So in this rebus, we're having the image or a pictograph. An image, a graph of a bee and the graph of a leaf. But the answer, belief, has nothing to do with the graphic meaning of these two signs, right? It's purely just the sound of bee and leaf, and it happens to share the same sound with belief in English. So this is what a rebus is, and this is what a rebus principle is. Now, suppose English has a writing system like the Chinese, all right, then you can write to be or not to be like this. All right, we have to, and we have this bee, the image of a bee, and then we have an or, we have a not, we have another to, and then we have another bee. So if you're writing English like Chinese, it could be something like this. All right, this is essentially how Chinese function, especially how ancient Chinese function. For so many words in the language, you can't make a pictograph of it. So you borrow this sound and you use it as a homophone for the meaning you want to convey. So this is what a phonetic loan is. And we see it in many other languages. For example, in Japanese, the Japanese kana are just, they're borrowed from Chinese characters, but they're actually just for the sound, not for the graphic meaning. Okay, now let's look at some examples in Old Chinese. For example, the first one is hand, And the ancient form is like this, but the clerical form is yo. And the familiar meaning, we're familiar with yo's meaning in ancient texts. It's again, and also. It has nothing to do with this hand, but just that the word again, and also happens to share the same sound as hand in Old Chinese, so that this word and this graph is used to write these words. That's what a phonetic loan is. It's borrowed to write these words, and the relationship between them is purely phonetic. There's no semantic relationship between the two. Again, as in the case of foot, we have this foot, and it's actually 指, and the meaning of 指, the usual meaning of 指 is stop. We're familiar with this meaning, right? But the original graphic meaning is actually foot. So this is borrowed to write the word stop. And then the same thing happens in the case of 旗. The original graphic meaning of it is bamboo basket, but then it's borrowed to write the word model particle. To put it even to explain it, to put it in an even clearer way, let's think about the or example. The graphic meaning of or is this. So sorry, the graphic meaning of this is or, but the borrowed meaning is or. So in English, you can write or with this. So this is essentially how the phonetic loans work. But then we have to distinguish between two kinds of phonetic loans. In the first case, in the cases we're looking at here in this table, the word stop doesn't have a graph to itself originally, so it borrows the graph of foot to represent it. Right? In this case, the stop doesn't originally have a word, but in many other cases, a word already has a graph, but it still can borrow other characters to write it. So if two characters are homophonous, they can be used pretty much interchangeably in ancient Chinese texts. So we call the first case 假借, and we call the second case 通假, if you want to distinguish them in Chinese. There are subtle differences between them. This means that when we're looking at a character like this in early Chinese texts, it could be not just this thing, but it could be other homophonous characters. And there are many reference tools for you to find these homophonous characters. But of course, you have to understand ancient phonologies to be able to understand this fully. I'm not an expert on historical phonology. There will be a lecture on historical phonology specifically. So I'm sure you will learn a lot from that lecture. But today, I just want to show you the reference tools and some basic problems. So here are the books that we commonly use for phonetic loans. Again, it's not comprehensive, but it's a good place to start with. I want to recommend, so we can distinguish these reference tools into two categories, into two kinds. The first one is books that give you phonetic series, a series of characters that share the same sound. And there are also books that give you individual examples of phonetic loans. So in the second case, we have all of these books, and all of them are available on the small mirror of ancient phonology. So you can look at them on your own. And I want to talk about the first one specifically, the 古韵通晓, because it's not available there, and but it's very useful. So on the right-hand side, I'm giving you a page from the 古韵通晓, which is our 编 case. So you can see 编 here, right? So 古韵通晓it arranges these characters according to their rhyme and initial category. So in this case, it's a 帮母原部. So 编 is in a 帮母原部. But what this book is really useful about is that it gives you other characters or other phonetic series that's also in the same initial and rhyme categories, so that you know that these characters can be potentially used as phonetic loans for each other. Okay, so this is really useful because it's not a collection of actually existing phonetic loans in ancient texts. It's not a compilation of existing examples, but it gives you, according to the theoretical hypothetical reconstruction of ancient phonology, it gives you the characters that belong to the same phonetic series or that share the same sound. So let's say if you see a character like ban, in an excavated text, then you're looking for potential phonetic loans, and this is a really good book for you. And you can consider all of these different possibilities. So it could be fan, or it could be ban, or it could be bian. Okay, so, but as I said, each reference tool has its advantage and disadvantage. what about the disadvantage of this book? Now, the first disadvantage is you might disagree with its phonological reconstruction, and its phonological reconstruction might be out of date. Again, I'm not an expert on phonological reconstruction, so this is something you can learn from the other lectures. But as for this book, I think even if you disagree with the phonological reconstruction, it is still useful because at least it gives you a clue as to what could be possibly included in this category, right? And also it gives so other parts. The book has a few introductory chapters that gives you its own the principles of its own reconstruction. You can read them, and you can actually know what system they're using. And when you're using this, you can check it against other sources, right? You can check it against other phonological reconstructions to see if these reconstructions really work, and you can also check them against the books in the second category. That is, the phonetic loans, the actually existing cases of phonetic loans. So let's try to see this ban example in an online dictionary. So remember that ban can be used as a loan for fan or pian or bian or ban or ban, the phonetic series of ban. So keep this in mind, and let's look at ban in a small mirror of ancient phonology. Okay, so here. Now, in this case, I'm not looking at the 训诂 section. I'm moving to the 通假 section. It has 通假字12部. So I put in this span, and I search it, and then it gives you these examples. So as you can see, in the 古字通假汇典, ban can be used as a loan for all of these cases. But now here is another problem I want to alert you to. You still have to check these sources. So first of all, there's a distinction between the phonetic loans in the 传世文献, the transmitted sources, and phonetic loans in the 出土文献. Why do we have to make that distinction? Because the phonetic loans in the 出土文献 are essentially modern scholars' theories. So these are not collections of facts, I want to alert you to. So it's not a collection of facts, but it's the collections of modern scholars' ideas, modern scholars' opinions. They're often correct, but sometimes they are just a theory. So you also always have to check it against the original source. And sometimes if it's only one theory, then it's you have to use it with care. All right. So don't take this as a dictionary. It's not a dictionary. It's just a compilation of resources. So, for example, let's look at this 古字通假汇典. It gives you these individual cases of phonetic loans. And as I said, many of these reference tools don't distinguish between phonetic loans and other kinds of variants. So sometimes you would see, things that are not really phonetic loans. For example, if you look at the 变字声系 here, there is the 变语平, and then the second one is this, and the third one, and the last one is our familiar ancient character form of 变, right? But this is not really a phonetic loan, right? You could say that this 变 is a phonetic loan for 变, but then this 变 and this 古文, it's probably the ancient and modern form of a single character. So sometimes you would see examples like this in books in a reference to a phonetic loan, and you have to be careful about these cases. You have to distinguish between them. Okay, and especially I want to so this book, 汉字通用声素研究, you need to use with a lot of care because it has a lot of examples like that. If you click on it, then so it gives you the 半字声系, right? So the phonetic series of ban, and then it gives you the 通用声素. That means other phonetic signs that can be used that are homophonous with this span. So it gives you all of these cases. But the problem is not all of them are really close enough to this span. So first of all, the phonological reconstruction is a little bit dubious, and then it's actually pretty messy sometimes when it comes to the actual examples. So when you encounter a book like that, you have to use it with extreme care. Okay. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that you can always check the results of the 古韵通晓 with these reference tools, and to see if they are really if that phonological reconstruction really work, and you can also check them against, let's say, the 拟音, for example. You can check them here. So, for example, you can compare the reconstructions of these. You can compare these different reconstructions. Okay. Okay. So let's go back. Okay, so now I think the 古韵通晓 and the 汉字通用声素研究, they give you phonetic series. They're really helpful, especially for paleography, because you don't just want to know, what is the reconstruction of one single character. You also want to know, a group of characters that are homophonous. So these are the books that help you do that. But you really need to know a lot about ancient phonology to use these reference tools in a sophisticated way. So anyways, let's move on to the next topic. There are a lot of problems of phonetic borrowing in current research in paleography. Here are some of the problems I can think of. There could be others, but again, as I said, this is not meant to be comprehensive. So I just want to give you a basic sense of the potential traps of this kind of research. First of all, there are competing systems of phonological reconstruction, and most of us are not experts on phonology. So we're not in a position to compare or to evaluate a specific reconstruction, which one is better. And few people can really master both paleography and historical phonology. I think there still needs to be a lot of collaboration between these two fields, but unfortunately, given the technical nature of each one of them, this kind of cooperation is still very difficult. And so you would often see that paleographers use very outdated theories of phonology, and phonologists don't really know very much about paleography. So that's something we often see in the field. So anyways, there are competing systems of phonological reconstruction. So when you're a beginner, when you're new to the field, you get lost in these different opinions, and you don't really know why there are so many differences. You don't really know which one is better. You don't really know how to choose between them. And this is a page on the ancient the phonological reconstruction of Zhou in the small mirror of ancient phonology. There are so many different versions. Another thing is about phonological distance. So what I mean by phonological distance is that for something to be used, for one character to be used as a phonetic loan for another, they don't have to be exactly homophonous. Sometimes they can be near homophones. So that is a huge problem because we don't know how near is near, right? We don't know how to define their phonological distance more accurately. There are some attempts at defining this phonological distance. What is permitted? What kind of phonetic loan is permitted? How near is permitted? What are the line between something that works as a phonetic loan and something that doesn't work? So if you are interested, I would recommend these two articles to start with. But this is also a huge topic, and I'm not an expert on this topic, so I would refer you to someone else. So the third problem is there are too many homophones, right? If we go back to the last page, let's say you see this character ban in an excavated text and it doesn't work in the context. So you're looking for other possibilities, but you have so many options, right? And sometimes you can find the best answer, but oftentimes you may have 3 or 4 different readings that make equally good sense. They're equally plausible in this context. Sometimes they're equally plausible. Sometimes they're equally, at least none of them makes much better sense than the others. So in that case, it's really difficult to choose from them. And this is also a huge problem for doing paleography. We often find ourselves in a position of having to choose between homophones that makes better or worse sense, but making sense is something quite subjective, right? As what makes sense to one person may not make good sense to someone else. So, okay. Then let's move on to the next topic. So this is the last category of reference tools I want to talk about. They're about orthography or writing conventions. I'm actually not sure if the English is correct here, and I'm not sure if I should regard this as a kind of orthography or writing conventions. In Chinese, it's usually regarded as the form, sound, meaning relationship, or the habit of using characters, or the character-word relationships. So there are two books. There are three books that I would recommend for this kind of research. The first and the third are about Warring States bamboo manuscripts, and the second one is about Western Zhou bronze inscriptions. But they all deal with the same topic. So on the right hand side, I'm giving you a page from the third book, from Xuan Jiancong's 战国楚系简帛用字习惯研究, and it should give you a sense of what they mean by 用字习惯, the habit of using characters, or 字词关系, character-word relationship. So let's look at this entry number 357. First of all, there's a character in the curved brackets, the braces. So usually in this kind of work, whatever is in the braces is a word, and whatever is not in the braces is a character. So this means the word 始, to begin or beginning, can be written in the following forms. So these three graphic forms can be used to represent this word. This is what it means, all right? This is just their notation system. And then it gives you the the forms of, it gives you these graphic forms, the ancient graphic forms of these characters, and then it gives you the context in which they appear. And finally, the author gives you a short, brief explanation of the meaning and the graphic form. So this is also a very useful resources for you. Recall the 法 example, right? There are three graphic forms that can be used for the word law. So we're still at the beginning of trying to understand this kind of relationship. One word can be used, one word can be represented by different characters, and one character can be used to write different words. It's not a one-to-one relationship. It's actually a many-to-many relationship. So we're still at the beginning of trying to understand this relationship, and these are the books that can help you with that. They often appear, although these are studies, but they often appear in the form of a dictionary. Okay, and to give you another example, this is a Tian Wei's book on the word-character relationship in bronze inscriptions. It's a really good book. So although it's not about Warring States bamboo manuscripts, I would strongly recommend it because it's also conceptually sophisticated. So to give you a basic sense of what he's doing in this book, let's say, so first of all, he talks about the one-to-many relationship, and then he talks about many-to-one relationship, and finally a many-to-many relationship. So in the first case, these are the images I get. These are the lines I got copied directly from the book. In the first case, the character hai can be used to represent all of these different words, and in this case, it's used as a phonetic loan. All right, it's the original meaning is this, and then it can be used as a phonetic loan for hu, for gai, and for he. So in the second case, 载, the word 载 can be represented by all of these different graphic forms. And in the third case, he's giving you a more complicated analysis. So all of these different graphic forms can be used for these words. Okay. So the character word, the studies of character word correspondence actually shows that when we're dealing with classical Chinese texts, when we're dealing with excavated texts in particular, we're dealing with not just not just character word correspondence. Actually, I prefer to use, because I think the word itself is also an ambiguous term. Sometimes we don't know how to define a word. I prefer to use the graphic form, sound, and meaning. This relationship between the three instead of between the character and the word. So we're dealing with, my understanding is that when we're dealing with these excavated texts, we're navigating through a web of complicated, convoluted relationships between graphic forms, sounds, and meanings. And it's not a one-to-one relationship, nor a one-to-many relationship. It's often a many-to-many relationship, something like that. So one graphic form can have more than one sounds. One sound can have more than one graphic forms. One sound can have more than one meanings. One meaning can have more than one sounds. And the correspondence between form and meaning is also very complicated. It's also a many-to-many relationship. So this is something we have to be really careful about. And this is also why a simple database search will not work. Okay, so now let's summarize our the stuff we have been talking about so far. So for a given, let's say you're faced with a bamboo slip, and a certain character on a bamboo slip. For a given character, the first thing you do is that you make a direct transcription of it. That is x apostrophe x. And then if apostrophe x does not work in this context, then consider interpreting it as another character. And what you're doing here is actually one of three things. You either take it as to be a graphic confusion, or you take it to be a rare. So in the second case, you don't have to read it as a different character, but you just have to sort of understand it differently. And in the third case, it could be a phonetic loan, and it's actually in most cases we're dealing with phonetic loans. Okay, so but after this process of searching and using reference tools and locating the most appropriate phonetic loans, usually in the end you find yourself in a position of having to choose between several possible readings. There's Y1, Y2, and Y3. So the question left for us is still, how do we choose between them? And what does it mean for a reading to make better sense than the others? And what are the criteria for evaluation? This is a really thorny problem. So one thing that paleographers usually do is to search for similar word combinations in other texts. For example, this word it appears in a string of characters, right? This Y1, Y2. So there's A, B, and C, and then there's the position, the place occupied by Y, and then there's D, E, F. So if you want to choose between 1, 2, and 3 for this position, then you look for other similar contexts, other similar combinations of words. But of course, it doesn't have to be exactly the same combination. Sometimes it's a synonymous substitution. So as long as you can find a similar parallel context, and usually we think that it's a better case. Why? Because it's not making sense. It's not making better sense subjectively, right? You actually have something more objective to support your argument. But oftentimes we can't find. But this method of searching for similar contexts also has a problem because, first of all, it tends to flatten out the meaning of classical Chinese, right? It assumes that this line cannot be unique. So if you're always looking for other similar contexts, that means ancient Chinese authors can't express them with highly original language. But actually, if we're dealing with a text like the Zhuangzi, for example, you can find a lot of similar contexts with other classical Chinese texts because the language used in the Zhuangzi is highly idiosyncratic, not like the Mencius, not like not like the other more plainer classical Chinese. So perhaps sometimes we're faced with a text like the Zhuangzi. We're faced with an excavated manuscript that's like the Zhuangzi, and the language can be highly idiosyncratic. In that case, you can't find a similar context. Another problem of that is the search for parallel contexts often breaks the unity of the text in question. So when we're trying to search for similar word combinations in other texts, we're not actually trying to understand this line itself in the manuscript, right? We're not trying to understand this manuscript as a whole. So perhaps in some cases you may find a good context. You may find a good word combination that really works here also. But then this doesn't make good sense in the overall context of the manuscript itself, right? This is a common problem of also of Qing philologists because they spend too much time on these individual characters and this relationship between this character in a parallel context and a different text without actually trying to understand the consistency within the single manuscript itself. So I think these are the potential problems of this approach, but it's still a good method, provided that we understand its limitations. So now I have given you a short demonstration of the process of working with ancient manuscripts. You can almost see this as a checklist of the things you do one after another. But the thing is, paleography is not really a mechanical procedure, a series of mechanical procedures. You can't just follow these things and become a good paleographer. It's actually more complicated. When you're actually doing it, it's more complicated. Although these are the things to start with, but oftentimes you don't work really in this fashion. So in the next lecture, I want to give you some more advanced examples and to give you a better sense of what makes a really good argument, what makes a really good philological argument in editing ancient manuscripts, and also give you some criteria for evaluation, some demonstration of some good criteria for evaluation. And I will do this by summarizing a few highly influential or widely accepted arguments in the field. This is to give you a sense of how advanced paleographers work with these materials. and you will see that it's not enough to just follow these procedures and use the reference tools. Okay, I'll see you next time.